All right, on this episode number 72 of the Holy Ruckus podcast, Josh here in your ear, and we are talking to Mike Lewis of Where Peter Is. That blogging site is been really good here in the DMV, in the DC metro area. So it's been, and it's everywhere, and it's something that I really wanted to do. Mike is a friend. And so, yeah, we're bringing him on the podcast to talk to Father Pat and I, and you are listening to the Holy Ruckus. If you like it, please do share, comment. Got a question for Mike and I. And Father, let us know in the comments. But here we go. Thanks so much for listening to the Holy Ruckus podcast. And let me begin. Let's see. Here we go. Hello. What's going on, guys?
Glad to be here. How you doing?
Hanging in. I just got done with some socially distant football practice, if you could call it that. I'm a football coach just for fun, on top of being a teacher. So I've been busy there chasing kids, working with them on their techniques. So it's different from being at home and not working on technique and chasing little ones around at my house. So it's great. Father Pat, how are you?
Guys, I'm so great. I'm thrilled that we're having this this conversation today. It's my perfect fall day out there. Not that I'm in it right now, but I will be shortly. Yeah, I'm having a great week.
And folks, we are joined by Mike Lewis. I almost said Father Lewis. Mike.
That's the other Lewis.
You have a brother who is
the other Father Pat.
Yes,
True.
yes. Talk, please. Welcome to the Holy Ruckus podcast. You are been on our list of we got to get you on here for the longest, and
Really?
So we're just happy to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's going on?
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. I know you and Father Pat and the other contributors. I know you had another Mike. You had Mike Tenney recently, and he's also written for you guys. And I actually had him on a podcast about 2 or 3 weeks ago, promoting his new podcast or YouTube show, Pop Culture Catechism. So check it out. But yeah, so basically, a little bit of background. Like both of you, I grew up in the Maryland suburbs and practicing Catholic my whole life. And during the from 2010 to about 2017, I worked for the USCCB, and around 2011 or so, I was starting to get more involved with my parish, more involved with my faith. Our friend Father Dan Leary, obviously at St. Andrews, which is where I got to know you, Josh, and I met Father Pat as a 18 or 19-year-old college seminarian.
That's right.
At the seminarian picnic, my brother was a few years ahead of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I it's funny because I think I traveled a journey of faith that's similar to a lot of our peers and a lot of the people we know, where grew up deeply embedded in the faith and really focused on the rules and doctrine and right and wrong, and all of those things are true and great, but there was a pastoral aspect that I finally tapped into. I think it's actually started through reading some of the things that Pope Benedict wrote on personal encounter, friendship with Christ, the idea of doctrine without love. All of those things started to influence my faith life. And then when Father Dan came to St. Andrews, I actually saw a priest who was really putting that into action. Like, he was meeting with people one-on-one, people going through all kinds of problems in their life, and encountering them and accompanying them and getting to know them. Like, I mean, for me, up until that point, a priest was always kind of like, my relationship with the priest would be like, he has good homilies. He was nice to me after mass. He was nice at grandma's funeral. We had him over to dinner 2 times. I don't golf, but people golf with the priest, and I never really saw, in retrospect, a priest as a father. And I sort of entered into that, became more active in daily mass, became more active in the parish and serving the community. And meanwhile, money troubles and more kids are coming along. And so really started to lean on my faith in that way. And also got to, was one of the beneficiaries of Father Dan's pastoring, because, there were some rough financial times in there. And yeah, so then when Pope Francis got elected, and his immediate gestures, washing people's feet on Holy Thursday in a prison, we remember when he was first elected, all these things that just sort of like were wow. And it's not to say anything against Pope Benedict. I mean, Pope Benedict was just a shyer person, and just had a different approach to things. But Pope Francis also, for those of us who are blabbermouths, I think we can relate to the extroversion of Pope Francis a little bit. So it was like, wow, this is really just taking my faith to a new level. I was reading his homilies every day, and to some degree, I appreciated his little anecdotes and his irreverence, and saying, we don't want to be, one time he said, like a bat-like Christian who hangs upside down in the dark in a cave, and it wasn't until about a year or 2 after that, after his election, that it dawned on me, like, I started to notice these criticisms, these little critiques. And I think it was at the end of 2013 when The Joy of the Gospel came out, which was his first apostolic exhortation, which sort of laid out his pastoral vision for the church. And it was really talking about how, yeah, we have the truth, we have the gospel. How do we bring it to people most effectively nowadays? And I've always had a mix of Catholic friends and secular friends. Like, all of my secular friends are starting to pay attention to the Pope, for the first time ever. And, but my Catholic friends are starting to like, well, he says some things that are a little concerning, or, he might say like, God loves you to, somebody, and doesn't say, but this thing that you're doing is doctrinally exactly. And they're saying it's confusing. And it's like, I sort of felt like I was on the wavelength, I thought, but this started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, the big thing that happened was Amoris Laetitia, his, on Marriage and the Family, came out, and all of a sudden people are just outright saying he's a heretic. And that just really blew my mind. And I was still working at the Bishops' Conference at the time, so I wasn't public about what I was witnessing. But I was starting to talk to some of the leadership there about, like, I'm starting to see a lot of people starting to see a lot of people in my Catholic community starting to really question this stuff. And yeah, I mean, I was going back and forth with people in Facebook groups and stuff, and spending too much time doing that. And then, but it was like, this is going to get out of hand if this doesn't, really pick up, or if someone really doesn't address it. And then, so I was hopeful that, the Bishops' Conference might be able to address this in some way. And unfortunately, just completely out of the blue, in the middle of 2017, I was laid off. And I was pulled into the meeting, and I thought, I mean, silly me, I thought I was getting a promotion. And they're like, yeah, we're doing, as because there was they kept telling us there was a restructuring coming and how great it was going to be. And I had been asked, like, what I was going to, what I was interested in doing in the new structure. And so it was just, I mean, it was devastating. Like, it was sort of like, well, what am I going to do on Monday? Like, where am I going to go? And I felt like I had a little bit of a voice to share, there were things that I felt like, people are like, oh, you don't want to work for the church anyway, or, you don't. And I was sort of like, yeah, but for me, like, this has been my passion. And there's something, there's a real void, I think, that needs to be filled. And so along the way, I had sort of gotten a group of 3 other guys who we had conversed about the church and issues, and had thought things through and asked questions of each other. And we started saying to each other, maybe we should like start a group blog or something like that. And then so we started to think about names and what the approach would be and what the voice would be. And so the things that we definitely honed in on were, we wanted to be faithful to the magisterium. We wanted to be supportive of Pope Francis, and we wanted to address people who came from similar backgrounds as we did, who put, the same priority on Catholic Church teaching, on fidelity to the church, but they were having problems with Pope Francis. And I didn't see anyone really out there, other than an occasional article here or there, that would really explain, it was either the far left that maybe had like a heterodox agenda, like, oh, he said this about women, this means he wants women priests. And the traditionalist side was saying, oh, he said this about women, that means he wants women priests. It was they were all pushing the
strange
same narrative.
bedfellows. Yeah.
And I was like, and nobody is filling in that gap of putting things into context, explaining what he's really saying, explaining that, okay, this is a shift, but it's not a departure from the gospel. Certain things like that, like, the idea of washing women's feet. There are 2 ways to look at it. One of them is it's a symbol of the first priest being ordained at the Last Supper. The other is the symbol of Christ the servant. Well, if you focus on Christ the servant, that applies to men and women. And whereas people are saying he's washing women's feet, he's a heretic, and it's like, no, there's an explanation for this that's perfectly in context with the gospel, with tradition. And so we started this little group blog in early 2018. So there was some thinking throughout 2017 of how this was going to come about. We picked the name Where Peter Is, and I know you were going to ask me about it, Josh, but I'll just go into it.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah, tell us about it. The first before,
he's anticipated us.
Yes,
he's on to us.
It's almost
as if you told me the questions ahead of time. Yeah,
it's almost as if there's like a toolbar with notes on it.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yes, we planned somewhat on the Holy Ruckus, a little bit.
Okay, so 2 reasons. Well, 3 reasons. The first reason is we didn't want the name to be Pope Francis only.
Related, yeah.
Really, what it is it's fidelity to the papacy, to what the church teaches about the papacy, fidelity to the Pope. And I fully plan on, whoever his successor is, that we will do what we can to contextualize his teaching and his acts with tradition. And I've said, if I'm unable to do it, I'll hand it off to somebody who can, because that's what this brand is. And humans are weak. There was a guy on, he was a blogger, and his blog was called Protect the Pope. But now he doesn't believe that Francis is even actually the Pope anymore. So it's
Pope Michael.
It was Pope. He wanted to protect Pope Benedict. And then when Pope Francis came along, it's like all of a sudden protect the Pope. I'm not gonna. It's like some. So the thing is, it's like whatever my personal failings are, this is a brand that exists to promote the Pope, to promote his message and vision and his papacy.
Yeah, Peter.
And so the second thing is, so then we were trying
to think, Apollos. I'm with Paul.
Exactly. So that, the Society of Pope Benedict XVI, or
right, yeah.
SSB. No, anyway. So
that's my club.
XVI. Yeah, no, and I mean, I was a Benedict. The funny thing is, almost every contributor to our website is a Benedict fan, and it's just sort of like the Benedict fans that are left over that still like the Pope. It's
I thought it struck me that like when I met you and like early on in Francis's papacy, like when I was over at St. Andrew's doing youth ministry, I remember you, Mike. I don't know, you kind of were like a little critical of Francis. I think like you weren't all in with him, were you? I don't know if that.
I think I was starting to be like, so the process, I don't know if it was during his papacy or if it was after. I think there were a lot of people there who were, and I was kind of going along with it. What happened was I had another priest friend who was another Father Dan. We have a lot of priests that have the same first name, who I worked with at the USCCB, and he's back in Missouri. He's actually the chaplain of Mizzou, the University of Missouri now.
Oh.
But I was like, so how do we know when the Pope is a heretic? And he's like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, when he teaches something like in an encyclical that does, or they have a council that doesn't line up with tradition. And he like looked at me like I had three heads. He's like, well, if you're like sitting at a table like this and the Pope says something to you, that's like not magisterial, but here's what Lumen Gentium says about assent, religious assent and assent of faith. And I read the CDF document by then Cardinal Ratzinger on the primacy of the Pope, the mystery of, or the primacy of the successor of Peter in the mystery of the church is the title of the document. It came out in 1998. And it had all these statements like the Pope is the spokesman for the will of the Lord, and the Pope is the rock that guarantees a vigorous fidelity to tradition and scripture. And so like I'm reading this document and I'm like, well, but what if he doesn't? And there's like no asterisks next to that. And then I started to read what like Pius IX and Pius X and Pope Leo and John Paul II, like John Paul II. And I'm like 3 out of 10 into John Paul's series of audiences on the papacy and the office of the papacy and what the papacy guarantees and what the papacy doesn't. And it was sort of like, wait a minute. So in terms of doctrine, like the Pope, it's not like up to us to decide if the Pope is Orthodox or not. Like, and to me, that was like a huge, like,
it's not.
Like I thought there was a book somewhere that was like, this is where the Pope, this is how you keep the Pope in line, or this is when you're allowed to ignore.
I just thought it was a hyperlink to Church Militant.
Yeah. I thought Michael Voris was like the Pope's like ombudsman or something like that.
On his shoulder, like.
Yeah. Taylor Marshall is taking it.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steer you away here, but the phrase "Where is Peter" comes from.
Where Peter is a quote by Pope, or by Saint Ambrose, who is the Archbishop of Milan. He was a contemporary of Saint Augustine, so 300 something. But his phrase is, and you probably know the Latin, Father Pat, ubi Petra, whatever. But it's where Peter is, there is the church, there is God. So when these types of conflicts come up, it's like, who do we look for the right answer on the faith? Who has the final word? Who can put his foot down to say, okay, you guys are arguing about, does Christ have one or two natures, or does Christ have, all the early councils? And it was basically came down to, what did the Pope rule? And so that's one part of the name. So it's like, okay, here's this phrase. Another thing, and this is actually Pope Francis centric, is during his trip to the Philippines, when he was about to fly back to Rome, Cardinal Tagle got up on the stage, and Pope Francis was sitting up there front and center to deliver an address to the Pope. And he opens it by saying, dear Pope Francis, we love you. We are going to miss you. We don't want you to leave. Therefore, the people of the Philippines are coming with you. And so that got kind of the laugh line, and Pope Francis looks up like, oh, and he says, not to Rome, but to the periphery. And so the idea, the symbolism there, going with like Pope Francis's focus on the periphery. We are going, one of the purposes of the site is to go to those peripheries that Pope Francis is asking us to. Wow. And whoever the next Pope is, whatever his areas of focus, that's, we're going to be right there with them.
There you go. So, and you said so I always love hearing the origin stories, always, except X-Men. I didn't need the origin story.
And then I was bitten by a spider.
Yeah, no more Spider-Man origin stories, please. But I will say, and you mentioned we got to move to the second point, but I wanted to just real quick this comment, if you could, like, there's like, I don't know if it's George Weigel who wrote this, or biographer for JP2, but I found it comical that they're like, the next Pope, or he wrote a book on the next Pope after Francis. And then, and I know you didn't mean to, but you said, well, then whoever the next Pope is. And I'm like thinking, like, is Pope Francis going somewhere? Like, is he?
Yeah, I don't. I have no foreknowledge. I mean, he could live to be 113 and not resign ever. Early on in his papacy, he kind of gave hints that it was going to be short, but it's, he would say 3 or 4 years, and now we're getting close to 8.
People taking bets.
I did a podcast with his biographer, Austin Ivory.
Oh, wow.
About a week and a half ago, and he said that he thinks Fratelli Tutti is going to be Francis's final encyclical.
Oh,
now,
wow.
I don't, and the other thing is, so Austin has a book coming out December 1st called Let Us Dream, which is an interview book with Francis, but unlike the interview books with Benedict, it's not question and answer. Like, it's basically taking Francis's words and then formatting them into a book, and then, with the explanation of this is how the book was made, and Francis signed off on it and everything like that. But it's a composition. And so it's like, I don't know if he has any special knowledge. I don't know if Francis is planning on resigning. I mean, he's spoken well of the idea of a Pope resigning. I think one of the things that Pope Benedict realized was the necessity of people today need to see and hear from their leaders. In the past, there was no television, no radio, but, the king was in a castle and he could have been languishing away for like 5 years and they never heard anything about his health, but it's like, I think he may see the Pope, while it is, obviously an office that has certain charisms and certain, authority, he might see the wisdom in passing it on. I don't know, but I'm not speaking any kind of inside knowledge other than that one statement.
You're like the Adam Schefter of like, there you go. But anyway, it brings us to this, like, so what's the last 30 days been like as a blog site that's actually trying to cover and you have writers that are dedicated to like talking about Pope Francis and then you have bam, like double whammy. I mean, has it been a slow news month or what?
It has been completely exhausting. The funny thing is, up until about a month and a half ago, I think people assumed that there's like this team working on it. And there is, I mean, there are writers, but it's like, I'm the sole copy editor, or I was the sole copy editor. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they're all great writers, but sometimes it's like some of them, like English maybe isn't their first language, or things there are certain incomplete and so it's like, it would be a lot of work to get one post up, and doing it completely on tiny little Patreon donations and things like that. And I mean, I've been unemployed since I had got another job, but I've been unemployed since March. So, I mean, COVID was because of COVID, but then there's that whole, the stimulus. So I've, and plus the other thing is my mom passed away in December and my dad had died before that. So it's like, a little bit of a cushion. Not that I want to dig into that, but it was sort of like now or never, midlife crisis. I turned 40, and so it was like, I kind of got it. Let's give it a go. And that's when the podcast started. But yeah, no, it's been crazy. And I've made all these connections, and all these people are asking to like be on the podcast, but I was the only one editing the podcast. And,
God bless you.
Getting submissions from professors in Italy and Mexico, and it started off as a group blog with like 4 dudes, and so but it's just grown, and I think people have taken to it, and I've made a lot of friends that are around the church, like Austin Ivory, who's been a huge supporter, and Christopher Lamb, who's the Vatican correspondent for the tablet. Sure. And they've been really helpful. And then when Fratelli Tutti came out, I have a friend who runs sort of an online Catholic web conference meeting, so virtual conferences, which are big at this time, obviously. And he's like, we need to do a live event when Fratelli Tutti comes out. And I was like, okay, like a couple of weeks after, he's like, no, I want to do it that night. I want you guys to be the first ones. So I'll have you know, this is my second live event that I've ever participated in on the internet in my entire life. And my very first one was a 2-hour, 5 to 7 p.m. like grand opening for Fratelli Tutti. I had 9 people, cycled them in just like you did. I didn't even know how to make people's heads shrink. I had to learn that on the fly.
There you go.
But I mean, we had professors. We had Christopher Lamb from the streets of Rome, who had covered the release of the encyclical and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But then, yeah, one of the other things that we've been following, and we try to be nonpartisan, or we are nonpartisan. We try to make a distinction between, if you discern in good conscience that you're going to vote for this candidate based on Catholic principles, that's okay, or that's between you and God. But there was something cropping up. This, I guess you'd call it Catholic Trumpism, where he becomes a hero. They're not recognizing the things that he's saying that are contrary to Catholic teaching. And it was kind of, and the fact that people like Taylor Marshall were brought into the campaign, and that Vigano is saying that Trump is the forces of light, and Francis, or Bergoglio, as he calls them, is the forces of darkness. It was like, and to see this widely shared and dispersed was, something that we've, one of our contributors, David Lafferty, has a PhD in like early reactionary movements in the 20th century. So conspiracy theories are like his thing. And to see QAnon being adopted by Catholics unironically was a little scary. And then, of course, yeah.
Do you think that's, I mean, I think that's a really astute hot take as it might be. It's very, I think it's on the button. Is that what's going on? Is that what's happening? That like the church, the way we read like the church, like I'm with Francis, I'm with Benedict, this like, the false dichotomies that sometimes get bandied about. Do you think that's what's feeding it? Is like just our natural inheritance from like American politics, that like we can't help ourselves? Like that's the junk food that we like consume all the time, that we have to be divided into different camps and like compartmentalized in our views. Like how would you explain that, the phenomenon of like division?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I wrote about recently was sort of I think after the 2012 election. So before Pope Francis, it just sort of dawned, because I was a political news junkie, and I was very partisan, and I was very like, who's going to win, and who's this going to advantage, and this issue's not that important because, that's the other side's issue. And I decided just to take a step back from party politics altogether. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing the things that I've written or tweeted that have been criticisms of specific positions where people say, do you want to help so-and-so win the election? And that's the farthest thing from my mind when I'm pointing out, this person's position stinks, and it's like, I'm not saying who you should vote for because they both have things that stink. And so, yeah, I think there's something embedded, these party loyalties. And I would like to see, rather than Catholics get sucked in by the ideology, like on the Republican side, supporting the death penalty, for example. And of course, right before the election, the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, day in between two executions, gives an award to Bill Barr. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party is terrible on abortion. And it's like, but if you talk about that issue, one side's going to jump down your throat for undermining a candidate.
Don't flood the comments, folks, about that.
I can't see them, so I don't know.
But I think that's right. I think the lens that we view a lot of church moves, is basically a natural consequence of how we've been brought up in a very partisan society. It's unavoidable. Like, even if like our little children don't understand like what's going on, or like how someone comes up with a policy position, they do understand lawn signs, like our children can figure out like what a lawn sign means, like I'm for this person,
Yeah.
And because I remember doing that growing up, and I was like, how do you even choose? Like, how do you choose like which lawn sign to put in your yard? And I think that there's a lot of times, I'm borrowing on probably wiser people than my own thinking, but
no worries.
I think there's a lot of times when I want somebody to tell me like, dude, Pat, here's what you need to think. Like, dude, just think this. Like, you go with me, And so it is easier to just rely upon a cult of personality, or like your personal connections and relations, your proximity to like, someone else's views, before I do the harder work of like figuring out where are my views. And perhaps the most hard work, which is like, why does the church think that way? Like, why does the papacy think that way?
So
where Peter is.
So I always love talking to, and I'll put you in that group, Mike. I always love talking to artists, people who run, their little mom and pop shops or blogs, or we had the family behind Proud Catholic Company that was here. I talked to Mike Tenney, who's a musician, ministry leader, right? I always love hearing about the process of how they go about it. And you alluded to it already in terms of what, how you choose to cover something, or right, not falling into the box of partisanships and all that. But what do you do when, the recent stuff that happens with the McCarrick report? What take us through, like, what was that like? Not like, the moment that thing drops and you see it and you've known about it. I mean, we've known about it for, last few years, but it finally, the Vatican drops this in the middle of, all this other storms of stuff. And we could say what we want about that. Okay? That's a conversation for another time or another place. But specifically your process of how you guys cover something like that, it's so interesting. Like, take me through it. Like, where were you when you found out? What'd you do? Who do you call? Who do you text? What do you do to get something in line to put something out? Because everybody wants to be first, right? But you also are coming at it from a different angle. So I'm interested in where Peter is, his role in the process.
Yeah, so obviously everyone knew it was coming, and I was keeping an eye constantly, like, what's the next hint that it's going to come out. I would pester my friends who had Vatican connections if they knew when it was coming out, because I, like everyone, I was getting frustrated. Then it finally was, it dropped on Tuesday, and I knew it was going to drop early, and I knew that there was going to be like an embargoed summary that came out at 7 a.m. and it was going to drop at 8 a.m. So I had a couple of people lined up who said they were willing to maybe slip that embargoed summary to me. But then at about 3:30 in the morning, and this is where insomnia pays off. I was working on something. I was editing audio. I got a text from Austin Ivory, and he said, "Hey, I'm writing my response to the McCarrick report. Do you want to run it in Where Peter Is once the embargo's over?" Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll see if it's up to our editorial standards. And then, so then as the day wore on, it's like I wanted to work through, I wanted to see the different responses. I didn't want to just sort of leave that one, that came out at 8:30 that we posted that. Meanwhile, our group of core writers, 3 or 4 of them were like, I'm going to read it straight through when it comes out.
400 pages?
49 pages. Yeah. So they were cranking through it. I had already talked to Christopher Lamb about doing a podcast on, after it came out. And so it's like, I'm juggling all these balls. I'm like, is anybody going to write anything about it? I mean, so I'm working with volunteers, right? And so it's sort of like, I can't push them
how do you do that?
to do more than, well, I mean,
I do it too, but not when things are as hot as this. I mean, here you have, the sex abuse scandal with McCarrick, and that's what we're talking about, right? For folks that don't know, right? McCarrick, credible stuff about what people knew. It is insane, but keep going.
Yeah. So I wanted to at least, and at this point I hadn't read a word of it. Like, it's been out, but maybe I saw some screenshots on Twitter or read some commentary but I was like, okay, well, who has a good response that's up? So I sort of did a scour of the web. I checked different websites. I posted a links site with reactions, Yeah.
No, sorry, real quick, because Father Pat, that leads into your question. Who do you trust? Who do you go to in terms of websites or resources, Pat?
Yeah. I'm always curious of like how people, because it's actually part of my job is I'm very comfortable with telling people when I don't know something. And I think that's a good pastoral skill that was imbued in me, probably from people telling me like, you don't know anything, Pat, along the way. But I like to, and I think I have, a vested interest in like steering people away from things that are inflammatory or at least bad for their souls, right? Because like this covers a whole range of topics, really. But how are you going about sourcing your information? And I'm not asking you to name your sources per se, but
well, like, there are certain people that I take everyone with a grain of salt when it comes to commentary, and take me with a grain of salt when it comes to my commentary. I mean, I think that there are certain sites that, or certain media outlets that are institutional, for one thing. I mean, when it comes, I mean, I like Bishop Barron is very faithful to the magisterium, very faithful to the Pope. He doesn't appeal to the Catholic left per se, but he's, so he's in kind of that milieu. I find, I think CNS is really good in terms of journalism, in terms of checking their facts, in terms of getting their stories. They don't do a ton of commentary, but I find that their professionalism is very good. And there are, I mean, obviously Chris, I'm friends with Chris Lamb and Austin Ivory, so I tend to go to them first, and obviously posted with, and I find that they are very Catholic and very rooted in fidelity to the church, and they're simply trying to reflect what Pope Francis is saying without the spin. And the McCarrick report, like, we did a podcast with Christopher Lamb, and I was asking some tough questions. I was sort of like, didn't Pope Francis say he hadn't heard anything about McCarrick? Yet the report here says that he had heard the rumors. Like, that's a discord. Like, he should clarify that. Cardinal Farrell said something similar. I think Cardinal Wuerl needs to go on the record and explain a couple of things. Not that it was any, but it's like, let's take a frank look at what this is. I mean, another controversy was the civil unions. And what
Pope Francis interview. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like, even without knowing that the video was manipulated or edited, I recognized it as 2 separate statements that he was making. because I knew that he had backed civil union laws in Argentina under specific circumstances, and I had heard him say everyone has a right to a family. So I mean, I don't want to like toot my own horn, but it was like I was like, he's saying two different things here, guys, and this is this and this is this. And then whereas obviously it's like the Pope approves gay unions, great. The Pope approves gay unions, no. You know, it was sort of like there's a nuance here. There's a pastoral, we love people without the but every time. And then on top of that, it's like, how do we deal with this secular society that's going this way? And we've got a church that teaches this. What's a realistic response that isn't going to turn us into, just people barking at the government? So
then how does, Father Pat, did you have something else before?
Well, I'm quickly figuring out, Mike, that there's both conversations that I'd love to have off camera, offline, where
for Patreon supporters.
That's right.
Yeah, either premium content or like Mike Lewis tells all, where we don't have to worry, or I don't have to worry so much about like the implications of such chattiness, but also just a heartfelt thank you. I don't want to I'm not the speed bump for the conversation. Keep things rolling as they are. I'm going to excuse myself to do my job as dispenser of God's mercy.
There you go.
But whenever we do this part 2, because I'm feeling part 2 coming, or at least like a continuing, recurring kind of back and forth, working relationship, like I'm all in. This has been incredibly a gift to me on a Saturday that was already pretty awesome. So,
well, thank you. It's been a while. How's the new parish? It's been like a year and a half now. Or no, how long has it been?
I can tell you that in these digs, I've been here since July, and it's like home away from home. It's as a MoCo boy, I had very little familiarity with PG, and now I'm not sure I want to leave. Although I left part of my heart down in St. Mary's County, so that's just another story for another day. But it's awesome, dude. I'm the luckiest priest in the diocese.
Best of luck to you. God bless.
You
Good to see you.
You are out. Oh, finally. No, just kidding. No, but the next thing, like, so then how does that happen with? I mean, obviously, let's make no bones about it. Like the report by the Vatican name drops, juicy name drops, 300 plus times. St. John Paul II, right? Name drops Benedict, my guy, someone that I love reading Benedict, and it hurts to see 181 times name dropped or whatever else. How does, I mean, because again, the inception from what I gathered from what you said earlier of where Peter is this kind of like, let's talk about the papacy, the chair of Peter, let's defend it, let's trust it. And yet, so where is that line? Like, and we're not going to say, oh, this is fraudulent or whatever. Like, that's for another conversation, another thing. But like, because I asked myself, like, where, like, I switch it a little bit where Peter is. Like, I say, like, well, where is the chair of Peter now? Like, when it comes to this kind of thing. I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because there actually is no guarantee that the Pope is going to be a good guy or a good administrator or super holy or make the best personnel decisions. Where we are safe, at least according to Lumen Gentium and Vatican I, is when the Pope teaches something to the entire church as Pope on faith and morals. So so in that sense, and because people talk about the bad popes from Alexander VI, the Borgia popes, and they were morally terrible, but they didn't teach error. And that's, that doesn't change if you don't like what the new Pope is teaching. But in terms of, was it a mistake to promote McCarrick? Obviously, for John Paul promoted him 3 or 4 times and made him a cardinal. When Benedict, and then in 2006, 2007, when Benedict was Pope, they settled these civil lawsuits in New Jersey, basically it was against adults, so it wasn't. I guess it wasn't technically a crime or against youth, and they decided to put forward these. Basically, told him to lay low, but he didn't follow this at all.
Yeah, he still traveled.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, and actually Father Pat was there because it was my brother's diaconate ordination. It was October 2011, so Benedict was still Pope. Vigano had already become nuncio in DC, and in St. Peter's in Rome, there's Cardinal McCarrick celebrating the Mass right next to Cardinal Leveda, who was the head of the CDF at the time. Like it's so I had been thinking like, so a couple months earlier was when the McCarrick revelations came out. And I'm thinking in my head, when the Vigano thing came out saying he was under house arrest, I had already thought, like, when was the last time I saw McCarrick? And I was like, oh yeah, we saw him in Rome, and that was then, so then when Vigano comes out with so he greatly exaggerated what kind of restrictions there were, or whether anyone was paying any attention to them. But in terms of and I wrote last night, in terms of John Paul with the promotions, I think he clearly trusted McCarrick. He did not think McCarrick had done these things. And 3 New Jersey bishops, 2 of whom were eyewitnesses to inappropriate behavior, wrote letters vouching for McCarrick's character. And then McCarrick himself had written or signed or swore something that he
swore on his office of the episcopacy. Like,
exactly
awful. And he played everybody.
Yeah. I mean, you can break McCarrick down psychologically, but I think he justified, like, he drew a line in his head and it was sort of like, well, I never crossed this line and therefore it's okay. Sort of like the teenagers, like, how far is too far kind of thing. And for some, now that didn't change the lives he ruined. That didn't change the scandal that this has created. But I don't think he realized, which a lot of predators don't, they don't realize how bad what they're doing is. Right. And so I think in Francis's, or in John Paul's case, I think he just misplaced his trust. And I mean, but he did that a lot of times. So there was a blind spot. It doesn't mean he's not a saint. It doesn't mean that he wasn't holy. It means he made serious errors in judgment. I mean, I don't think if he had really believed he had done this, he would have promoted him. Now, Benedict was a little bit different because there were obviously these civil lawsuits. Apparently, he forced McCarrick to retire from Washington once this happened and ordered him to lay low, but nothing formal. And I think because he was pushing 80 and because he was retired, it was sort of like, well, let's just move on from this, I guess. And then when Francis became Pope, finally a minor came forward to the Archdiocese of New York, and then everything else came pouring out. And in retrospect, something should have been done long ago. It seems that, I mean, I don't know if you were aware of the beach house rumors until it came out.
Not at the time, but like I'd heard those.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard them too, but on the other hand, they're saying, here's your archbishop. Like, he's your archbishop. He deserves the reason. And so it's like, well, is it true? Is it not true? I mean, when it's like, people say everybody knew, everybody heard, but only certain people knew. Only certain people had spoken to an eyewitness. And obviously Pope Francis, or not, obviously Pope John Paul had not heard, or he had heard, but he didn't know, or he thought it was untrue.
And that's tough. And it's not like we can ask him, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's put him on record. Like, and yeah, there's so much more, but I want to bring it back to what you said. You're like, here's what we can't guarantee. We can't guarantee the fact that whoever is sitting in the chair of Peter, right, can do awful things. We've seen it throughout history. We've had as many as 3 popes at the same time. We've had Julius II. We have so many like popes that have done dastardly things, And yet, what can we guarantee as a church for those that are watching, listening? Like, because I had it, I teach, I'm teaching church history right now, right? Church history in my school, and you can't help it talk about current events because we're talking about the Protestant Reformation as well. And so we're talking about Protestant Reformation, talking about Luther and the gripes he had, right? Valid ones, and then the not so valid ones, and everything else. And then you can't help but say, like, well, has the church learned its lesson? And then you go to the present, and my kids are like, my students are just like, what the heck? Like, this guy's my confirmation saint.
Yeah.
What can we get? Like, because
I mean, the number of John Pauls in our,
oh
between your age and my age is.
How many kids are named after this guy? But it, it goes like this. It's like, wait, did you name your kid John Paul?
No, I don't have a John Paul.
Okay, no, me. No. But for those that do, like, what can we rest in security and in safety with? And I want to bring that to you because that's where people are like wrestling. Like, yes, we want accountability. We don't want to be supportive of the clericalism and all this other stuff. But at the same time, how ought we look at the chair of Peter? How ought we look at the statement of where Peter is, there's the church? Like, how can we look at that now? Does it change? Obviously, it doesn't, but it's harder. It's harder.
I mean, it's brought a different. Definitely, it's been a wake up call. However, in terms of Francis's papacy as a whole, because I mean, obviously, probably a lot of people that you know can't stand Pope Francis and think he's teaching error or whatever.
Absolutely.
The definition of schism is refusal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff. It's like breaking communion with the Pope. Now, he has disciplinary authority. He has doctrinal authority. If you're hanging out with him and he says, "Hey, let's go rob a bank together," that's not, it's, I mean, just that would make a good movie. But in terms of doctrinal communion, that's really where it stands. We can disagree. It's not the purpose of our site, but there are areas of prudential disagreement where you can disagree with the Pope. Like, for example, I bring up that the foot washing issue. You can think that was a terrible idea. You can think it should only be men
that he washes the feet of.
But to say he's a heretic because he says we can wash women's feet, that is crossing a line. And that's to me the line that's been dangerous, because like there's a blogger, his name is Larry Chapp, and he's a professor, and I think he lives in Pennsylvania on a Dorothy Day farm or something like that. And you can tell by reading him, he cannot stand Pope Francis personally. But
and that's
in terms of doctrine, in terms of authority, in terms of the papacy, we're in total agreement. Now I'm trying to get him to like Francis better, but and I can totally get if you like one pope better than another for whatever reason, but there are certain lines that for a Catholic to be infidelity with the magisterium, and Catechism CCC 100 is the magisterium, that is the Pope and the bishops in communion with him. You've got to give doctrinal deference, and it might even be, let's say he's teaching something a certain way that you prefer the other way. Like, remember the change on limbo, for example, and people are always like, well, you can still believe in because the church has taught that limbo is a possibility that you can believe in, and you can also you can put your hope that a child that dies unbaptized, you entrust them to the mercy of God and hope for their salvation. You can still say, I believe in limbo, but you can't say, I believe in limbo and you're a heretic for believing what the Pope said you can. You know what I'm saying? That's the difference.
Totally. And so the guarantee, like for me as well, like in wrapping this up, because it's a dark, it's a smudge, it's a dark time, and you think about the victims who aren't mentioned, at all in the report, and all these opinions that I have about like it being a hit piece, and everybody who's guilty is dead or canonized. But it's like the guarantee here is like, where are you orienting your trust in, and where you're looking? And I don't mean to be like, okay, like, schmoozy here, but it has to be Christ. It has to be
Oh
Christ.
yeah.
And in the church, and in trust that, like, when Jesus said to Peter, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall never prevail against it. Do you believe that? And also, church, don't fawn over Peter, because look, he's about to put his foot in his mouth 3 times and deny Jesus, like before the cock crows. It's like, that's a reality, and the humanity of our leaders is a reality, and they will be held accountable in this life or in the next, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah. Well, I
God
mean,
not going to be outdone in justice and in mercy. So that's going to kick in. But yeah, like, I don't know. I just think, and we were talking about this with Pat earlier, because when he was growing up, like, he saw McCarrick, and he was, and I talked to another friend, and he was an altar server at a mass for McCarrick. And there was kind of like this, like, whoa, here is this prince of the church. Here is this, and we get fawned over, but yet but then when this happens, we get rocked and we leave the church. So, but if we have our eyes on Christ and see, like, these people are supposed to signal Jesus, they're supposed to be those signs. But,
I think that there is a clear, people get hurt by the church. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, I told my story. I got laid off by the church. My dad had just died. I just had a new baby, and here I am, like, unexpectedly out of work. Like, it threw, I mean, it rocked me. And while I was there, believe me, I saw money being wasted. I saw poor communication. I saw people who really didn't have the best interests of the church at heart. I mean, I mean, there's something real there, right? And I think people have. It's interesting because I think there are areas where you can trust the church, but there are other areas where you can only expect the worst. I mean, even like in my discussion with Christopher Lamb, it's like, is there any guarantee? Yeah, okay, the McCarrick report, and I don't think it was a cover up. I think it was pretty frank, especially because, speaking of Franks, Pope Francis, there were some contradictions in what he had said before. It wasn't a total whitewash. I think it was a pretty straightforward document, but it was an internal in-house document, for one thing. And I've seen enough times where they say, yeah, we're going to change. We're going to do it this new way. We're going to have open communication. And everyone nods their head, and then they go back and they do what they used to do. So I think having great expectations, I mean, I see the biggest success of Pope Francis's papacy as a spiritual father. Clearly, he's made mistakes in terms of personnel. He had to fire a cardinal that he just made, Cardinal Becciu, 2 years ago. He's made bad appointments. He's made bad calls. He's slapped a lady by accident, or not by accident, but after she grabbed it. I mean,
I saw this tape. I rewound it a couple times.
I mean, he's human. He is human. He is not perfect. I think he's got a good grounding in realism. And I think he has a lot to teach those of us who kind of came up in that conservative Catholic milieu, where our vision, a lot of us have this vision of the church where we wanted this happy church that's full of Orthodox families with sermons that, like, tell us all the doctrines that we agree with, and the bad stuff is out there, and somehow we're better because what Pope Francis is saying is like, no, that kid who hasn't, that guy who was baptized and had his first communion and hasn't been back to church in 22 years and is now working at is a drug dealer, like that guy is a Catholic too. Or even if he's not Catholic, like, that's somebody that is of equal worth and equal dignity. And you don't come at him by saying, you sinner must stop your lifestyle immediately, because that's just not how you relate to people.
Sure.
So that's
a drug dealer. I was like, he's going to say guy who works at Quiznos.
That would, that poor guy really needs Well, we all do.
Come to Jesus, folks. Man, what excites you about, and then this is the final thing for
Sure.
me. What excites you, man, about like the work that you're doing at Where Peter Is? Like, what excites you?
Um, that is an excellent question. I think one of the thing, oh my goodness. I think the ability as a writer and as a podcaster, and you can probably relate to that, is the ability to put into action my ideas, put into to give voice to what comes to me in prayer or what comes to me in my reading, and to be able to share that with other people. To Here's the other thing, and sorry, so that's one thing. The other thing is, I'd say 4 or 5 times a week I get an email or like a messenger message or something, or DM from a reader who either has just discovered our site or has been reading for a while, and they can really relate to that situation of either their family is opposed to Pope Francis, or they've all bought into, or their whole parish is into Taylor Marshall, and they knew something wasn't right with that. And so then a part of them, and then they finally find someone who's interested in fidelity, who's interested in orthodoxy, is faithful to the Pope, and is presenting things in a realistic, honest way. So to hear from readers is really encouraging to me.
Dude, that's awesome. Where can they find you besides Where Peter Is? Where can they find you? Where can they follow you? Because man, we got to do a part 2, but for sure, how can we support you? What can we do?
Sure. Okay. So the website is wherepeteris.com, all one word. My Twitter is, and our Twitter, Facebook, our Patreon is all linked there. Our podcast is called Peter's Field Hospital, which is another, Pope Francis's phrase is he wants the church to be a field hospital. So that can be found either at wherepeteris.com or at petersfieldhospital.com, which I just set up the other day. And it's everywhere that you subscribe to podcasts, iTunes and Google and Stitcher. And my personal Twitter is MFJ Lewis. So Michael Francis James Lewis, so MFJ Lewis. So we're around, and check us out, but wherepeteris.com.
That's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been rocking with the best, the Holy Ruckus podcast. We've been with Mike Lewis. We're so excited again to have had you and to develop this relationship.
Well, you finally invited me.
It took 4 years for me to get my ducks in a row. You're big time now, buddy.
So are you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Hey, do check out wherepeteris.com. Do not go to the other one, which is Where Is Peter, because that's something else, right, Mike?
Well, no, it's a nickname that somebody has given to us, so don't worry about it.
Wherepeteris.com. Mike Lewis, man, thanks so much. And we'll see you again.
Thank you. God bless.
All right. Thanks, guys. Check it out. We'll see you next week. Father Pat and I will be back. And again, check out the website, www.theholyruckus.com, for blogs, podcasts, and more, at The Holy Ruckus on YouTube and Instagram. Thanks so much.